two more presentations this afternoon, and then we'll hear from Tom Janot. But right now, we have Oscar Momanyi from Marquette University. Please.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I was supposed to present this topic together with someone from Vietnam, Sister Maria, but unfortunately she got sick. So I'm not going to talk about Asia. I'm going to talk only about Africa. So I had to cancel out the Asian part. So I'll just focus on Africa. Unfortunately, she couldn't manage to be with us because she's not feeling very well. So the topic changed a little bit. The question I seek to answer through this investigation is religious belief still an issue for today's diasporic African communities in the context of rapid globalization and immigration? So I'm looking at communities out of Africa who are living in the West, most of them. To answer this question, I draw on the experience of second-generation African immigrants in the West, especially in the US, to respond to this question in the affirmative. Immigration in the contemporary globalized world is an unstoppable reality. To illustrate this reality, I draw on the African Youth Survey of 2024, published by a Johannesburg foundation known as the Ichikowitz Family Foundation, which surveyed African youth aged 18 to 24 across 16 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And the report revealed that 60% of these youth wanted to immigrate to the West. These and other data from the global South, not only Africa, but other places in South Asia and other places, which are similar, necessitate the need to examine how immigration impacts religious belief, since religiosity is important for the well-being of diasporic African and even other communities from the South living in the North. According to the Pew Research Center, there is an observed decline in religiosity among the second-generation immigrant African population in the US. First-generation African immigrants show significantly higher levels of religiosity, about 72% reporting that religion is very important to them. This is compared to the second generation, which think that only 59% of them think that religion and faith is important to them. Further, the second generation, especially the Gen Z and millennials, are less religious, less likely to attend religious services, and are less likely to pray regularly. That's according to the Pew Research Center. There are many factors that could account for this reduced religiosity and belief among second-generation immigrants, especially Africans. I propose that these two main ones, there are many, but I propose that these two are the main ones. First is the acculturation and secular socialization. Growing up in Western contexts, second-generation Africans are immersed in societies where religion is increasingly privatized and optional. Second is the tension between communalism, that I'm going to focus on, and individualism. Many African traditions emphasize communal belonging, authority, participation, respect for elders in that communal setting. Second-generation young Africans in the West, however, are socialized in cultures that prioritize personal autonomy, self-expression, and moral agency from the individual self. This tension can make inherited religious practices from the continent of Africa feel restrictive and even irrelevant in the new context, leading to disengagement and in some cases outright disbelief. I argue that at the heart of this change is the move from the more communitarian cultural context to a more individualist, radical individualism. I'm going to talk about radical individualism a little bit later, which has affected the belief systems of African immigrants, leading to a decline and religious disbelief. The loss of this sense of community in immigrant, because of immigration, has also led to the decline in religious belief, as Africans' belief systems are largely communal. I thus propose to resolve this problem in this paper. I propose a balance between Western individualism and African communalism, grounded in what Kwame Gyekye is a Ghanaian philosopher, Kwame Gyekye calls moderate communalism, moderate communitarianism. So Kwame Gyekye proposes that. So I think if this is appropriated in the context of diaspora communities, this can help African immigrants to adopt a healthy sense of the belief that does not alienate them from themselves, from others in community, and from the experience of the transcendent in the context of radical individualism that they experience when they move to the West. Scholars have widely noted that second-generation immigrants in general often experience a tension between the collectivist cultural orientations that they experience in the South and the individualist ethos of host communities in the Western context. Cross-cultural psychology has shown that migration frequently entails a shift from a relationally grounded identity towards models that emphasizes personal autonomy, self-determination, a transition that can generate cultural dissonance and psychological strain in the immigrants. In sociology of religion, especially the one proposed by Peter Berger, this phenomenon is often described as the phenomenon of religion in the individual, which is privatized in the West. This phenomenon is known as the privatization of faith, whereby religion religious belonging is maintained at an individual level, but it is engaged as a communal participation of and moral formation. Studies show that African immigrants frequently experience a shift as a moral and spiritual fragmentation, and I think that is the core of it, is a moral and spiritual fragmentation, particularly in family life, religious participation, and religious participation. So religious communities and institutions that host these migrant communities in the West thus become critical sites for resistance to excessive individualism. My point is, individualism is okay. I'm not saying that individualism is bad. In the same way, I'm not going to say that communalism is bad, but what I'm critiquing is excessive, and I'll call it radical individualism, and also I'll critique the opposite of moderate communitarianism, radical communitarianism. So what I'm proposing here is a moderation of individualism and a moderation of communalism. So that's how, I think that is the background of everything that I'm talking about here. Okay? So immigrant communities, religious communities, thus become critical sites for resisting excessive individualism or radical individualism, functioning as spaces for social support, communal or cultural continuity, and collective identity formation. So, how to achieve that is what I would like to propose in moderate communitarianism. Okay. However, even within this institution in the host countries that try to help these immigrant African communities appropriate themselves within the context of individualism, even in this institution, individualistic norms increasingly shape patterns of belonging, leadership, and participation, challenging traditional communal models of belief. Still, even if we want to appropriate the communal African ways here, they are still living in this context, and they cannot avoid individualism. So how do we get the balance between the two? That's still a key issue there, okay? Therefore, the problem of individualism among second generation African immigrants is not merely an adaptive problem, but an anthropological one, raising urgent questions about how communal identity and faith traditions can be sustained and reimagined in the diaspora. Individualism is a structural and cultural force that shapes immigrant faith, belonging, intergenerational transmission of faith and belief, which needs to be integrated creatively into these communities of African and even other communities from other from the global south who come here, so that they can feel that they are they are living here in individual, where individualism is a cultural aspect, but still connected to their communal life back in their countries of origin. How to do that? I propose the solution to this is moderate African communalism, which is proposed by this man, Kwame Gyekye. Kwame Gyekye is a Ghanaian, a philosopher. I think now is deceased, maybe 10 years ago. This is his main work, Tradition and Modernity, Philosophical Reflection on African Experience. So it's kind of how do we bridge tradition and modernity? So what I'm even talking about here is happening, this struggle is happening also within the continent itself, okay? Because of rural-urban migration. So people are coming from rural areas with the way of life in the rural areas. It's quite a bit different from how people live in urban areas. So how do we bring tradition and modernity together in a way that authentic African tradition, authentic African culture, African communalism can continue rather than dissipate? So I would like to argue that African communal life seems to fail to adapt itself in the Western context because in most cases it takes the form of radical communalism, that is, radical communalism, which is repulsive to Western individualism and fails to strike an integrative balance. I propose that Gyekye's moderate communalism can help strike a balance between the Western individualism and African communalism and help African religiosity in diaspora to grow, okay? So I claim that when Africans come across when they come to the West, the communal life of Africa in the radical sense, where the community dominates the individual in radical communitarianism, does not function well, does not sit well with Western individualism. Therefore, using Gyekye, I propose that the community and the individual should have kind of a synergy. So the community is not totally giving the individual the identity, but it's kind of a mutual self, what is it called? Mutual mediation, mutual self-mediation. Okay. So on one hand, radical African communitarianism, the individuals derive their identity from their belonging to a particular community. The community confers on the individual personhood upon, but also not only personhood, but also ontological primacy, epistemic accessibility, and also has epistemic accessibility over the individual. From this perspective, it is rootedness in the community that gives the person their defining identity. An individual is not a person without a community. So the community the arrow goes on one direction, from community to individual, as you see there. Okay? So tradition elders, ancestors. Personhood is conferred by conformity, and then the individual. On the other hand, moderate African communitarianism examines the constitution of the human person, and this is Kwame Gyekye who proposes this. Radical communalism is proposed by scholars like Menkiti, John Mbiti, and others. Moderate communalism is proposed by Kwame Gyekye, Kwasi Weredu. These are African philosophers. So moderate African communitarianism examines the constitution of a human person apart from their natural belonging in community. So what else is there? Moderate communitarianism asserts that a person is rational, capable of virtuous conduct, able to evaluate situation and make moral judgments, and to make intelligent choices. Proponents of this moderate communalism further observe that community does not create these cognitive features in the person. The community only discovers them and nurtures them. So these cognitive features play an important role in shaping who the person becomes. Therefore, the community is not the sole, the community does not solely bestow this personhood to a person, to a human person. Okay. This description of the person is within the framework. This description of the person within the framework of moderate communalism in Africa resonates with Lonergan's transcendental precepts, in which a person is capable of being attentive, intelligent, reasonable, and responsible. So it resonates with that. Okay. Moderate communitarians observe that the community only partly determines the person, who the person who becomes, only partly, not fully like in radical communalism, okay? Thus, they affirm the importance of the communal structure which the person must be born in, because through its tradition, historicity, it produces values and practices and meaningful options from which the person can choose responsibly. The responsibility of choosing life goals, however, does not rest solely on the community. The individual must choose among available alternatives within the limits of the community. An individual can reevaluate and in some cases, in some instances, reject some of the community's values and aspirations and develop new ones, challenge the community. People as individuals in a community thus contribute to the community's growth through the use of their cognitive features in what Lonergan calls the self-correcting process of learning, in which new insights build on older insights, thereby growing and improving the community's knowledge base. An individual, as a self-corrector, can help in the correction of the communal consciousness, thereby building up the community. Through its sensus communis, which is the communal sense of what is true and right, knowledge that enables people to discover what is self-evident within a community, within the communal consciousness, the community can also correct the person and also correct itself through as a communal self-corrector. Through mutual self-mediation, the community can correct the individual too, thereby fostering new knowledge that enables the growth of the individual and also the growth of the community, thus emphasizing collaboration rather than isolation. An African communitarian perspective offers a constructive response to the problem of individualism among second-generation immigrants by affirming the primacy of community while safeguarding personal agency and moral autonomy. This this moderate communalism, I would like to compare it to a critical community, a community that fosters critical re-evaluation and evaluation. It fosters new questions, people to raise new questions. It brings about mutual self-mediation. Unlike radical communitarianism, which tends to subordinate the individual entirely to the group, moderate communalism maintains that the person is socially constituted, yet remains capable of critical reflection, responsible choice, and moral dissent too. This balanced vision is particularly suited for diaspora context where immigrants must negotiate communal belonging alongside the demands of personal adaptation and self-determination. Applied as a complement to moderate Western individualism. So I didn't see any scholarship about Western radical. I created this myself. So moderate individualism in the West and radical individualism in the West versus that is Kwame Jeje. But this, I never had a chance to see a scholarship that talks about this, but I just put there to put like a comparison there. Okay, so applied to complement moderate Western individualism, moderate African communalism neither rejects autonomy nor absolutizes it. Autonomy is very important. So community is important on one side. That's what Africans we believe, and I think is important. But also individual choice and individual agency is quite also equally important. So how do you bring the two together to help these diaspora communities really feel a sense of belonging, a sense of being together in community that will help them even to be close to the transcendent. Moderate African communalism critiques forms of individualism that erode social bonds, moral accountability, and intergenerational responsibility, while affirming individual rights, creativity, and freedom as essential to human flourishing. In this way, African moderate communalism provides a framework for reimagining immigrant identity that resists both social fragmentation and cultural rigidity, opening a space for reflection on transcendence too. That is the point where I wanted to bring in Ubuntu, but I'm not going to bring Ubuntu there. I'll skip that part. Or maybe I just, because how many minutes do I still have?
You could take 5 or 6 more minutes.
5, 6 more minutes, okay. Let me do the Ubuntu part. Communal life is at the heart of African communitarian ethics and spirituality is linked to the notion of Ubuntu. The basis of Ubuntu is a framework of communitarian, the basis of Ubuntu as a framework of communitarian anthropology is the maxim, a person is a person through other people. Okay? Meaning that each individual personhood is ideally expressed in relation with others. Ubuntu safeguards the flourishing of human beings in community and links them to horizontal relationship between themselves, but also a relationship with the transcendent, who is the source of the life force within the community. According to Ubuntu ethics, there exists a common bond between all human beings and through the interactions and between all human beings, and it is through interaction with fellow human beings that people discover their human qualities. Ubuntu as an important framework for understanding African communalism has lost its power amid globalization and immigration. The reason for this loss, I argue, and Joseph will have a lot of problems there. The reason for this loss, I argue, is that it is anchored on radical communalism. Why is it not having its power? Because it's still stuck here. And it needs to move out here so that it will be open to globalization and new context and the change that is happening in the world. Okay? So radical communitarianism is a closed system that is not open to criticism and does not allow new questions to emerge. I argue that Ubuntu, when appropriated for diasporic communities from a moderate communitarian perspective, can better help address the fragmentation and religious decline in belief among second-generation African immigrants. What I envision in appropriating Ubuntu for diasporic African communities is a communitarian ethic rooted in a broader horizon of modern communalism, a sense of communal belonging that is open to modernity, dynamic, seeking further exploration, leading to higher viewpoints, and allowing individuals in community to grow and self-appropriate within an empowering context of community. This is the integral, let me use that word, Joseph knows where that comes from, integral vision of Ubuntu that is open and can offer diasporic African people resources for reimagining transcendence in a new context, reimagining communal life in a new context, and providing them with spiritual nourishment and care. It is also possible to argue that this reimagined Ubuntu for the African diasporic communities based on moderate communalism, together with the communities that it can create, are cosmopolitan utopic community that emerge with time. So it takes time. It's not something that is by saying that we are now adopting modern communitarianism, it will take place, it will work tomorrow. No, it takes time to develop. Okay? Ubuntu in this context is governed by intelligent schemes of recurrence and emergent probability that allow these communities to develop over time under appropriate conditions. African philosophy of moderate communalism, let's go down. Oh, it's not moving. Oh, it's this one. So that's radical. African moderate communalism articulates a relational anthropology that challenges atomistic individualism, characteristic of Western modernity, and Descartes is our friend there, avoiding reducing the person to the collective. So it challenges radical individualism, but also avoids reducing a person to the collective. Human flourishing, which includes heeding to the transcendental call, emerges not through the absolutization of autonomy, but through dynamic balancing of relational opposites, individual and the other, agency and receptivity, differentiation and belonging. In diasporic contexts, this relational synthesis has significant implications for social and religious life. Immigrant families, faith communities, and ecclesial institutions can serve as mediating spaces in which individual dignity and communal belonging are held in a creative tension rather than in opposition. In appropriating moderate communalism, immigrant communities are offered constructive vision of identity formation that neither capitulates to Western individualism, and when I talk about that, I'm talking about radical, I'm talking about radical individualism, radical Western individualism, not moderate individualism that I am thinking about. So it pushes back on radical individualism, nor does it idealize static forms of communalism, the radical form of communalism, but instead reimagines belonging as a dynamic, relational, and morally grounded reality. In summary, the decrease in religiosity among second-generation African immigrants is less about rejection of God and faith, and more about negotiation of identity. That's what I want to drive home. Many are not abandoning faith per se, but are reimagining belief outside inherited institutional forms, seeking expressions of spirituality that resonate with hybrid cultural, social, and political realities. Appropriation of moderate African communalism and Ubuntu in diasporic communities can help creatively address the question of religious belief among second-generation African immigrants. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Question?
Hi, I'm from Spokane, which is a little bit like Nazareth. So the word Ubuntu just kind of showed up at our campus over the past couple of years.
Okay.
I noticed it was an object of mockery on the other side of the room. But there was a panel last spring. I think we thought we were doing something cutting edge on synodality and Ubuntu, comparing the two notions. I wondered if you had any thoughts about that from like the Catholic point of view, synodality being the Catholic buzzword of the hour, and I guess Ubuntu being a kind of magic word.
Yeah.
And the attempt was to say that there's the same kind of spirit in both this movement inside the church and this appropriation of an African idea.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's one of my research interests, and I am. It's a very when we talk about synodality from the African context, it's kind of something that we have been practicing already in small Christian communities across the dioceses. Okay, so small Christian communities that meet every week, speak about first of all they share the Word of God, and then talk about realities that they are facing in their communities, and try to find solutions of how to resolve this community in a very consultative way. Okay. It's something that has been there especially in East Africa since the 1970s. By the way, African countries are very young countries, independent in the 60s. So for us, when you say 60s, that is very old time, ancient times. So it started in around, this way of being church started in around in the 70s. Okay, it's losing steam as we began this new century, the 21st century. So synodality is a wake-up call for us to really embrace small Christian communities, to really embrace this way of being church, to really embrace a way of being community, okay? And to move these small Christian communities from, some of them are still very radical, so still, to how do they evolve into moderate communitarianism that I'm talking about here, okay? So it's still a work in progress, but the seeds of synodality are already there because of the communal aspect of way of proceeding. And we have a notion of palaver from the traditional African context, where in a palaver, which used to happen under a tree, the elder will meet with the other elders, and they will spend a lot of time talking about the situation that needs to be resolved. It will take even days to happen. And then they will come up with this, with the final solution that they will take it forward, okay? But now it was very patriarchal. The palaver is a very patriarchal thing. So we need to critique that using moderate communalism. So say, how do we make a palaver open to include even a feminine voice into that? So those are the things that I'm thinking about so much, and I have reflected about that somewhere quite a lot, and by the way, Joseph is my dissertation director, that's why I'm always talking about. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes?
Could you say, you just said that synodality is losing steam.
No, the small Christian communities are losing steam.
What I'm fascinated by with that observation is the larger question of how modernity is maybe pushing against traditions like the one you just described. If I understand, what you're suggesting here, the radical communitarianism that is embedded within these highly traditional communities. Okay, so tell me if I'm understanding it right. That's a model that is still common in sub-Saharan Africa now. So part of my question is then, are there forces that are moving away from that kind of communitarianism? In other words, is there like a penetration, let's say, of consumerism or globalization that is moving against that model and is pushing it more towards a kind of individualism?
Yeah, so there's a big move pushing us out of radical communalism into moderate communalism. Okay. And that is the Generation Z.
Okay.
The Gen Z are pushing back a lot, and they are asking questions, and they want a different model of being community.
Right.
In
and
the
that's
continent.
even not just in the diaspora, but
even in the continent
even
itself.
within the continent.
It's within the continent.
Yeah.
So what they do is they start in the continent, and then when they come out here, they become even more radical in their wanting to come out of the old way of being into the new way of being. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph.
I mean, the only reason why I raised my hand is before knowing that you will be talking of Ubuntu, once I saw communitarianism, I wanted to have a joke with you about Ubuntu. Right? Okay. I did not know that everybody was paying attention. All right. So I want to share my own experience. I agree with you 100%. For 8 years, I was the Catholic priest chaplain of an African community in Toronto. So we meet once a week. The diocese wanted us to be meeting every Sunday. I said, no, I don't want to silo them. I want them to be able to integrate into the various parishes where they live. And within that community, what you see is that there is a pushback against radical communitarianism. That is why your paper resonates with me very much, because as we are talking, I have experiences from North America that justifies 90% of what your paper is about.
Thank you.
So, but then there is the tendency, the challenge, the struggle. There are so many struggles in that community. Ordinarily, they get support from the community. That is what radical communitarianism, okay? If they were in Africa, they would get support that would not intensify the examples I want to give now. For instance, I get called up around, I always leave my phone on. At times I get a call around 1 a.m. There is a domestic violence. Now, they don't want to call the police because that would change the whole dynamics of the relationship. They don't want out of the relationship, but they also want the domestic violence not to continue. So they don't have that personal relationship with their pastors in various parishes. So they reach out to me around that time. And I was younger back then, and I could take at times, despite the weather, even if it is snowing, I would drive. And then I would go there and I will sit with them. At least I will douse the tension a little bit. There have been occasions where from 12 o'clock to 5 a.m. we were beating about the bush. Because I knew that what they have presented to me as the source of the domestic dispute is only at the surface level. But at least my aim is to play the role of the community. So my example is, yes, radical communitarianism, radical individualism. My pushback against Ubuntu is that it is just an ideal. It is an ideal because when the concept of Ubuntu is transported from Africa to either North America or Europe, it gains a universal color as an ideal. Oh, what a wonderful idea. But Ubuntu within Africa is not that, it's not beyond the little scope of the community. Mm-hmm. I mean, Ubuntu gives the impression of universal brotherhood and sisterhood of humankind. But within Africa, who is your brother? Your brother is your kinsman, those from your community. People from other communities are outsiders, more or less. I mean, in my own part of Nigeria, we say, Okoro deribibo, maya karabayan. Let there be good things among people, but let more of it be among my own people.
So that's radical community. That's radical.
So you don't go into, you don't rob members of your community. But if you manage to get wealth from some other place, members of your community will celebrate with you. So the point I am making is, my pushback about Ubuntu is just that when it comes to the West, it has a different meaning. Mm-hmm. So that's just my only criticism. Even within Africa itself, Ubuntu has a different meaning in the rural area it doesn't have in the urban area.
Yes, that's true.
Small Christian communities work. I mean, I have discussed this with Oscar, he knows my position. They work within rural communities, but they become problematic. It's not that you don't have them in urban parishes, but urban parishes is made up of people from different parts of the world. So that sense of community is not as grounded as it would, yes, as it would be from those from the same kinsmen, from the same village, from the same community. I've been a pastor in a rural area. I was a pastor in rural area for up to 7 years. So I know the rural dynamics. I know the urban dynamics. So this is just my little pushback about Ubuntu. It's not that Ubuntu is not good, just that we have to be able to understand the scope of Ubuntu. It is an ideal. That's just my only pushback. So I just needed to say this because I started Ubuntu thing.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Oscar, do you want to say something quickly? And then I want to do one more thing. We're going to get a little behind, but I want to do it anyway. So
yeah, let me just add something there. So what is I wanted to add in my paper too, what is the form of communalism that is predominantly in rural areas, and Joseph may add something, is radical communalism. So what JH suggests, and I think what I'm suggesting for urban areas and even diaspora, is how do we adopt this moderate communalism? Because JH put it across this in the 90s, but still we haven't really managed to really live it. Moderate community. What does it entail? How do we practically live it? Still, people are still struggling. Like in Kenya, tribalism is very strong. So my tribe, I have to be with the people of my tribe and everything. So we are still struggling to really move or to really to have this kind of moderate communitarianism that we desire. So it's kind of something that it's a utopia that we are looking forward to, which we were working towards day by day, slowly by slowly. Yes, John.
So I have a question, but it's not going to be directed to you. It's going to be directed to all of you. And could you go to the slide with your grid again for me, please?
Oh, sorry, I keep confusing these two computers here.
Very good. So you gave us a lovely bibliography of figures that you would classify under radical communalism and moderate communalism. But you said you didn't have much in the way of figures or texts that were examples of radical and moderate individualism.
I would say Descartes is here.
Sure, but you don't have much. Yeah. So here's the question I want to ask to all of you, which is, we help Oscar with good examples of these, of this distinction in individualism.
Yeah, so Robert Putnam is the key sociologist of just individualism. He's written 2 books. The first one is what really gained him a great deal of attention in the United States. It's called Bowling Alone.
Okay.
And he charts the rise, and the image of bowling alone is that in the 1950s, Americans would bowl together in leagues. It was a very community activity. And then by the 90s, it had become an isolated activity. So he charts that, and he's a Harvard sociologist. You know, and then in his later book, which is called, what is the title of it? Anyway, he extends the analysis to say that beginning in the 1890s, it was a much more fractured environment, and then it rose to he calls it a we society by the 1960s, and then it declined. But it's a very strong analysis.
Yeah.
Robert Putnam.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I thought this was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
The book that comes immediately to mind for the modern individualism is Jeffrey Stout's book. I think it's Democracy and Tradition. That's an excellent book. And he speaks directly to that. Like, he's really trying to, save individualism in America from sort of what he considers to be radical communitarianism on one side, and then sort of second generation sort of liberalism on the other. It's an excellent book. The other one, I mean, Michael Sandel as well. I mean, all of his work, I think, is probably, in that sort of that middle ground camp.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Last call, any other recommendations quickly? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone. Thank you.